I hadn't drained the engine oil on my 6.9 in a few years, but this was only a couple of thousand kilometers ago. So the external dipstick is on the right quarter panel because of the dry sump engine, which was designed to accommodate the height of the engine and lower it in the engine bay. So going up on the hoist, you can see there's 3 ports of drainage. One is the main sump at the bottom of the engine, 2 is at the filter, and the 3rd is the external reservoir where the oil is pumped into. So the main sump has the 14mm in-hex. That was obviously released with a breaker bar before we finger undid that. And you can see the oil is already quite dark, although it's only done about 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers since the last change. It's been a while. So we just pop the bucket down on the ground and let that continue to come out. And then we move on to the external storage reservoir, which is on the right side, and that has an 8mm in-hex, which you need to release. Now the car was run for a minute before the oil was drained, and that warms it up and lets it flow a bit more freely. So here we are undoing the in-hex on the right side. See a bit of overspray when they did the bottom panel around my chin spoiler at one point, I think. The dipstick should be out to allow the vacuum, the seal to be broken so the oil flows more freely. And so then we pop another bucket down on the ground and move on to the filter, which has a 17mm socket attachment. And mine was looking a little bit old, this filter housing, so I had a few of them spare from a couple of 6.9s I wrecked many years ago, which had met their end. So just undoing the filter housing. There's actually not that much oil in that one, thankfully. So an old Hengst filter, which you can see is all pretty dark and contaminated. There's a seal around the housing. So the old filter. And this is a new one from Ben's. We bought a stash of these a while ago because we've got a couple of these 6.9s, and at the time I think they're about $50, but I don't know what they are at the moment. So in the box you get your filter, and then you get the external seal and a crush washer for the sump plug. So there's our new filter. And we've cleaned up another of the old filter housings. It's interesting, some of them have the sticker on them externally and others have the dimensions sort of etched onto the metal housing. The ones with the sticker were generally this blank painted type, which seemed to fare a little bit better. So we've cleaned this one out and degreased it and washed it up. And there's no contaminants in there. The filter just gets a little bit of oil on the 2 seals on the top and bottom. And then we pop a bit of oil around the external seal, which will pop on. So the filter housing goes back on the left side of the engine bay, left of the sump. And this is one task where actually access is reasonable if the car is elevated, unlike many of the other things on the 6.9 engine bay. So this just gets spun back on with its 17mm socket attachment before we pop the torque wrench on. The torque wrench is done to 40 Newton meters. So our 8mm in-hex goes back on the right front region of the external reservoir, and then the crush washer is put back on the sump plug. Here's the old one, which has been squashed in pretty hard with probably a little bit of over tightening, and we just hand tighten that up before torquing it up to 40 Newton meters.
It's meant to be. There we go. Crank.
So the manual references 11 litres of oil once you've got the filter in. So to be safe, we've just popped in 10 litres, and my experienced mechanic used to say the Valvoline 2050 was a good oil for these cars. So we popped in 2 5-litre containers worth with the intention of checking the oil level following running the car. So after all the oil is in, the car is run after putting the car back on the ground and letting it run itself to safely pump itself up. And so hopefully your hydro pneumatic is not failing and the car remains bottomed out. And so we're going to run the car and then check the engine oil with the engine running, which is different in the 6.9.
There we go. Good. Hydro's coming up.
And so once again, just checking the engine oil level with the car at running temperature and the car running before being comfortable you've done the job.